So just to kind of start off, I thought I'd explain a little bit about the organization that's hosting this event today. It is the Data Collective. The purpose of the Data Collective is to build a community to help charities and other civil society organizations to access and analyze the data better in order to increase their impact. The collective exists to foster connections between people who may be facing similar data challenges, to share good practice, and to help organizations to share their data with other organizations. If you join, there is a mailing list, a Slack channel, and group workshops. The space is not only just for like expert data practitioners or analysts, but also for other folks in the social sector, including senior leaders, to discuss topics like this one. This is the first of a series on data and the cost of living crisis. We'll be updating everyone for any follow-ups via email and newsletters and all the places I described before. For today's session, we're going to have two approximately 15 to 20 minute talks by our speakers, followed by 15 minutes for a question and answer section. Please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A option of this call. Some final bits and pieces. So please do feel free to leave ask questions in the chat if you'd like to, and we'll try and collate all of them. Also, another thing is we do have live captions. They are the automated kind, so they're not entirely perfect, but you can turn them on by basically clicking on the more bit and turning on the captions. Finally, we would like to apologize for, well, I guess the people who can't make it, but I'd like to apologize for all the people who, we do have a limit of 100 people on this call, so apologize for anyone who can't make it, but we are recording this as well. Yeah, I think that's it. So maybe we'll start off with our first speaker today, who is Morgan Wild. Morgan is the head of policy, families, welfare and work at Citizens Advice. Currently, he is leading their cost of living campaigning and influencing work.
Great, shall I kick off, Nish? Fantastic, really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much to the Data Collective for inviting me. Nish was telling me a lot about the organisation when we met to discuss doing this. It just seems like such a great initiative to have out there, and really excited to be part of this conversation today. So, as Nish said, my name is Morgan Wild. I run our cost of living work at Citizens Advice and been doing quite a lot of our data showcasing in the past few months particularly, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. So this presentation, I'll try and cover a couple of things. Bit of housekeeping about who we are, what we do, how we work as an organisation, a little bit about how we use data, but I'm going to use that mainly as a jumping off point to talk you through a few of the trends that we're seeing at the moment and how we use our data to make decisions about what we're campaigning on. And then hopefully we'll have a really good conversation after Tris and I have gone through our respective presentations. So hopefully I can navigate my slides successfully. There we are. Who are we? So Citizens Advice, we are the largest provider of free independent advice in England and Wales. We are a federation, so we're a network of 250 plus individual charities across a couple of thousand locations across the country. Best way to think of us is like McDonald's. We're a franchise model. Individual charities come together under the Citizens Advice identity and provide advice to anyone and everyone who needs it. We help around 2.6 million people a year with one-to-one advice, and then have a reach of about 40 million on our website. So chances are, if you live in the UK, you've probably accessed Citizens Advice services on a website or face-to-face in some form or another. We have two missions, basically, as a charity. One is to provide advice to anyone and everyone who needs it. That is entirely person-centered. They're in charge of their own lives. They understand what's going on for them. Our job is to provide them with the information, the knowledge of often quite complex systems so that they can find a way forward and make progress with whatever problem they're encountering. The second part of our mission, I like to think of as quite radical. Like, we are trying to, as much as possible, put ourselves out of business. So our advocacy is trying to fix the underlying causes of the problems that people come to us with. So yeah, typical person coming to us for advice would have 3 or 4 different problems. One of those might be, just pick some random examples that are salient at the moment: falling behind on problem debt, problems with making an application for disability benefits, needing some access to crisis support. All of those issues that we can help people with there in the moment, but they are very often also a consequence of wider policy failure. And my job, my team's job, is to try and look at those policy failures, convince decision makers to do something about them, and hopefully, in a kind of virtuous circle, have fewer people needing our help in the first place, because there's fewer policy failures lying around making people's lives miserable. Alongside that, we've done a lot of work over probably the past decade in improving our data capabilities. So each of those 2.6 million one-to-one interactions, we capture all of them. So a huge amount of what we do is record keeping, understanding people's problems, having a good record of them, knowing what types of issues they are. All of that information, all of those stories, go into our bespoke data management systems. We call that Casebook, and that goes back probably to around 2013, 2014. So we've got this huge time series of consistently coded data. By data, I just mean people's stories about what is going on in their lives and the problems they're facing. It allows us to track trends and look at different pockets of problems, look at the types of people who are having those problems, and hopefully my job, tell a compelling story about those trends in a hope that decision makers do something about it. Second part of our data capability is basically our analysis function. We take that database, we stick it into a tool that many of you may know called Tableau, which allows us to extract interesting trends and reports from the data. And then the last thing we do, this is probably the most recent thing we've done, is visualize that data in compelling ways using a tool called Flourish, which is what powers some of the visualizations that I will talk through today. And what do we do with that data as well? Part of what we do with that data is all in the kind of service delivery side, which I won't talk about, but making sure that we are improving our offer to people, knowing where we could be doing better, know where we're really succeeding in helping people. A lot of it is to help inform what policy positions we take as an organisation, and the kinds of arguments that we put to governments. So this just shows the most recent time that we've done that. Obviously, all of you will have been following the detail of the energy price guarantee, which is the Prime Minister's freezing of energy prices so that the average household will pay no more than 2,500, which will be 2,100 this winter when you factor in the additional discounts. Also been some cost of living support in that space, which I can talk more about. We're in quite a privileged position, I would say, in that because we have that data, we don't rely on just my take about what our policy response should be. We can look at what's actually happening to people in real times and help that inform our view. So what I'll do in a moment is just jump to some visualizations of how that illustrates how we basically ended up in the situation of saying, oh yeah, this is welcome that you've frozen energy bills in this way, but there are going to be still huge problems around bills being sky high and particular groups that we're worrying about. So I'm going to jump from, hopefully, if I can manage it, just to our Flourish dashboard. Can everybody see that okay? Somebody nod prominently, fantastic. This is what we call our data dashboard. Some of you may have been to our cost of living events, which we put on monthly. I will put on the link to the next one in the chat if anybody fancies joining. We go in through these slides in much more detail than I will do here, but this is just to give you a flavour of like why we make the decisions to continue arguing, but particularly for people on low incomes, the level of government support to help with energy bills hasn't been enough. And for me, like this slide is the one that sums that up more than any others. So the lines on this chart represent different years of demand for a particular issue, right? So this is cumulative number of people who we've seen have been unable to top up their prepayment meter each year. And as you can see in 2019, that's a fairly modest issue, starts growing a little bit in 2020, starts accelerating in 2021, and then in 2022, we've just had a completely unprecedented year of people coming up to us because they literally can't afford to top up their prepayment meter. We started building this graph in June, and what we did in June was project forward, like if we had the number of people come to us with this issue, as we have done in the first half of the year, in the second half of the year, what would happen? So that dotted blue line was our projection in the June of this year. What you can see happens since then is basically an acceleration. Really just draw your attention to that acceleration between July and August. In August, in 1 month, we had the highest record number of people coming to us with this issue that we'd ever had, which, as you will imagine, is quite surprising. August shouldn't be a big year for people not being able to it shouldn't be a big month for people not being able to top up their prepayment meter, because in August we typically use less energy. This we would expect to get worse over the winter, and there's basically nothing in the package announced so far that we would expect to reverse that trend. It will stop this number getting truly catastrophic and like starting to accelerate massively. But that trend, it's going to carry on beating the trend unless the government intervenes to help more people on low incomes. Just leaf through a few of these. I'll not talk to these, but if anybody has any questions about particular graphs in this, we can share it in the chat. and I'm happy to speak to them. These are just some of more of our crisis indicators. So, for example, cumulative number of people we've helped with homelessness issues each year. This is slightly above where we were in 2019 and considerably above where we were in 2020. 2020, many of you will recall, was a massive decrease in homelessness issues as a consequence of the everyone in and eviction ban policies. And we saw that really come back a bit in 2021, but dramatically in 2022. Just leaf through a few more of these just to give you a bit of a flavour. This is data from our website. So the other data is kind of mediated a bit by our ability to meet demand, right? So we always have more people wanting our advice than people who can successfully get through. We don't have that trouble with web data, so in a sense, it can offer a truer view of demand in some respects. And this is just 5 of our top cost of living web pages, and you can see the trend is inexorably up and accelerating in recent months. This is an interesting one. So just to show you charitable support. Charitable support is things like fuel vouchers, things like people who are accessing small one-off cash grants. And we see this peakiness, like whenever people are coming to us in general in greater numbers, we see a huge increase in the number of people we're helping for the first time. Partly that reflects the structure of charitable support. It's often something you can only get once, but part of it reflects people who haven't needed our support before needing it for the first time. These are kind of irrelevant to my general point, but they are cool. So I will just show you how the most common type of debt issue has varied by local authority over the past few years. The one to keep an eye on here is that red energy debt and how it starts to displace council tax arrears, which is typically our bread and butter debt issue. And if I just hit play, you can see we're still in 2019-20, so council tax is still a big issue, but now we start to see the red coming through and basically start to dominate as our most common debt issue across the country. There are a few places where things like rent arrears and council tax debt still win out, but overwhelmingly energy debt is the most common debt we're seeing at the moment. Just underlines the need for the government to do more. And then this is the one I think is most fascinating, if I can just remember where it is. Loads of these are fascinating, so I really encourage people to have a look around over the course of this discussion. But this one is the number of people we're referring to food banks by demographic. Thing to draw attention to in this chart is that big dip in July 2022, and then a big recovery in August 2022. This, with like almost 100% confidence, is entirely due to the cost of living payments, the first tranche of the cost of living payments that started reaching people's bank accounts in the last 2 weeks of July. If you look at the demand for this service we have called the Help Through Hardship demand, which is something we run in partnership with the Trussell Trust, you just see this dramatic, which is how we most easily refer people to food banks, see this massive decline in the last 2 weeks of July as people get that support they desperately need. But it doesn't last long. So in an ideal world, you'd see that reduction really sustaining as people have more money to help them get through the next few months. But it barely lasts a month until we're back up to near level records of people needing referrals to food bank. And the interesting thing here is we can look at it by demographic. And many of you will know this, those cost of living payments were just flat payments, independent of people's household type. So you got the same amount, whether you were single or were in a relationship and had a large family. And that kind of reflects the reduction in demand that we see. We see the biggest, steepest reduction for single people who benefit most from those cost of living payments. And then for couples with children, we see a really quite shallow reduction in demand, which just suggests even more that those payments very helpful for single people relative to larger households for whom the money would obviously not go as far. So it's things like this that lead us to the conclusion that the energy price guarantee, obviously insanely expensive, a huge intervention from government to protect people's energy bills this winter. We think for people on low incomes, people on benefits who are disproportionately likely to be coming to us, it's still not going to go far enough, because we're seeing it in the data that even with energy bills at the level we are now, we're seeing unprecedented waves of demand for our most urgent issues. Last thing I'll close on is just, this is a live tracker of what people are searching for on the Citizens Advice website or how they're reaching us from Google, and just provides us with a bit of a insight into like what people are wanting help with at any given time. And so if you see things like warm home discounts, lots on energy bills, childcare costs, universal credits, all coming through as a live ticker of what people are interested in. And then we have our trending content. Weirdly, one of our most popular pages is reliably how to claim compensation on flight delays. But if you look beneath that, it's always people wanting advice on how they can get more support with their energy bills, how they can access benefits, and the kind of support that is available to them. So I will stop there. Am I handing straight over to Tris, Nish?
No, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, Morgan. You have quite a few questions in the chat already, so
fantastic.
Be prepared. Next up, we do have Tris. Thank you so much, Tris, again for stepping in at such short notice.
Not at all. Delighted.
Shall I just introduce you first?
Sure, sorry.
Tris Lumley is the Director of Innovation and Development at MPC. Tris leads MPC's work on innovation, developing new approaches, programs and ventures to create significant long-term contributions to the capability and capacity of the social sector. He also leads on developing MPC's relationships with core funders, philanthropists, foundations and businesses who have a shared commitment to transforming the social sector to achieve its full potential. Working with partners in the UK and globally, Tris is primarily focused on collaborative and infrastructural approaches to data and digital in the social sector. Thank you for joining us, Chris. I'll hand over to you now.
Bro, thanks, Nish. And yeah, I'm sorry to be standing in for Jo because she's brilliant, but because the story of our work on the Local Needs Databank that I'm going to be talking about today very much started through a conversation between myself and Jo, it kind of feels appropriate that I can jump in a little bit. But I would say do check out Turn to Us's work, both the work that they're doing in general on the cost of living crisis, but also the work that they're doing on data that's very closely connected to the Local Needs Databank. So, and it's great to follow on from you, Morgan. Thanks for a great presentation. Sisters Advice does an amazing job of, as the front door into a lot of services and support for the sector, of using that data to paint a picture of what's going on, and does a great job of trying to turn that into policy action. So it's a tough job to follow on from that, but hopefully what I'm going to talk about is complementary to that picture, because we're interested at MPC on how, not just how government and policy responds to data from charities, but how funders respond, how charities respond, and how everyone can use the data that charities are producing. So just to go back in time a little bit, I was looking back through my Twitter stream to March 2020, when at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't know if people, what people were doing themselves to kind of, everyone was looking around for data. Everyone does in a crisis. Everyone was looking for data on the spread of COVID. Bunch of kind of techies, digital data types connected with Newspeak House were putting something together called the Coronavirus Tech Handbook. Don't know if anyone came across that or was involved in that effort at the time, but that was a bunch of people coming together trying to crowdsource resources and data so that they could understand and respond better. And so this question was in my head as we were looking at the sort of data sets that were helping people to understand the spread of COVID better. Who's doing this with charity data? Charities are out there in communities and they are responding to very real needs and to very real people in communities. And they have sets of eyes and ears that currently others aren't able to benefit from. The kind of the sensor grid that charities potentially represent, if we're able to connect up the data that's coming through those sensors. And so I put out a question on Twitter, who's thinking about sharing charity service data and demand data to get a picture of what's going on. And Joe Kerr was actually the first person to respond to me on that question. And we got into what then turned into the Local Needs Databank. Over the next couple of years, Buttle UK, who are also an individual grant maker, so they make grants to individuals, as well as Turn to Us. And then British Gas Energy Trust, who are focused on the fuel poverty side of things and also make grants to individuals. And then the Trussell Trust joined as contributing data partners. So people can check out, I will share screen briefly, but I will say that actually the data bank is currently down for maintenance. So what you see here is some of the stuff that's available through the public Tableau dashboards. But here, so this is Trussell Trust data, and it simply shows food bank, food parcel distribution over the last 8 years, and it shows that regionally. So, it's pretty obvious what the trends are. You can also see, because this is total year data, the 2022 data looks like it's down, but the trend is obviously massively on the increase. When you look at that kind of data, time series and geographic variation are the two main things that you see there. And that's the same with the data that we have from Turn to Us, from British Gas Energy Trust, and from Buttle UK as well. So that data's there, and since that data has existed, we have been doing, I guess, what the open data movement has done as well, which is put data out there and say to people, go ahead and use it. You can download all of the data that underlies the Tableau dashboards that are there. But along with the open data movement, I think we've been finding that actually we don't know so much about how people are using that data or could use that data. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad to be here today, because fundamentally, from our perspective, we need to know much more about how that data is being used. So let me jump back to what we're doing around the cost of living crisis, but then maybe come back to how the data can be used. So one of the things, whether or not you know NPC, we're a charity ourselves that works with, we work with funders, philanthropists and charities as a consultancy, but my side of the organization is the charitably funded innovation and think tank side. And there we are trying to support and influence charities, funders, government, businesses and others. And we're kind of well known, you know, we've got philanthropy in our name. We're well known for having connections with and networks that include philanthropists. So influencing philanthropy has been one of our main aims throughout the pandemic, and remains, you know, throughout all of our work, but throughout the cost of living crisis. So one of the other links that I might share, or maybe Nish or Darcy are able to, is to the resource guides that we have on the cost of living crisis. So we produced one for the pandemic. Brilliant, thank you. And we have also produced one for the cost of living crisis, which is basically saying, looking qualitatively, looking through the research across the field, where are we going to see the impact of the cost of living crisis hitting worst? Where are the areas that are affected that people are maybe less aware of? And who is affected most? I mean, it's already come up in the data today, and you'll see that in citizens advice data, but people with disabilities clearly suffer disproportionately in terms of the impact of the cost of living crisis. That's not necessarily something that people responding in philanthropy are necessarily super aware of. So the kind of guides that we produce, the qualitative guides that we produce, are there on the site to help guide people and help them make better decisions. And we hope that the data that we have on the quantitative side from the Local Needs Databank helps to do the same thing, right? That we're able to actually populate those kind of qualitative pictures. We're able to support them with more detailed, granular quantitative data that shows quite how disproportionately different groups are hit. So people with disabilities, the young and the old, minoritized communities, we know there are bigger gaps and there are bigger unmet needs in those communities. And so we want philanthropists, we want funders to respond more and to focus on those gaps. So that's, you know, that's what we're trying to do in a way. We're also, someone I think in the chat I saw earlier, someone asking who's, you know, interested in charities sharing their data to respond more. That's very much part of the picture of what we're trying to do, is to say that charities have an amazing kind of latent potential in what they see through their own services and what they see through their demand. And, you know, charities big and small charities, and maybe there are some represented here today, but small charities, as you know, DataKind and the Data Collective know well, don't have necessarily the resources and the data skills to be doing the kind of analysis and sharing work themselves. But we can provide some of that as infrastructure, right? And we can say that this is an open opportunity for charities to share their data. And that's absolutely critical, because one of the big problems with the data that we have is, and I think Morgan touched on this as well, we see the data from people who are connecting with service provision. They are seeking out support. And, you know, in the case of the Local Needs Databank, they know about Turn to Us, or they find Turn to Us or Buttle UK or Trussell Trust or British Gas Energy Trust. But that doesn't necessarily mean we see demand from certain demographic groups who may not know those organizations or may not seek them out, certain communities and areas where there may not be a presence. We know in the case of some of those grant support schemes that the demand that they see is proportionate to the resource that they're putting into those local areas to raise awareness of that support. So we see a partial picture. The demand data that we see doesn't represent the actual demand that's out there. So we don't know about the sort of the hidden gaps, and that's really, really important. And then finally, really what I want to say is that, and I've touched on this, that we've provided some data, we've done analysis ourselves as NPC and working with those partners. So we're able to share some of the insight, much in the way that Citizens Advice does such a great job of looking at that data and digging into it and sharing insight so that others can respond. So we can do some of that. But actually, I will be very honest, we know very, very little about how anyone else out there might actually use this data. And so I said, we've got time series data and we've got geographical variation, but actually, what are people going to do with those things? We have some hunches and poor intuitions based on our even the good experience that we have as an organization. So we know that charities will want to understand local needs in order to present their work in context to others, to funders. For example, funders are often interested in what the needs you're addressing, and so that kind of data can help local charities and help with fundraising, we think, but we don't know about that in detail. Funders can target their funding to areas of unmet need and to areas where there are hotspots and gaps. But we actually don't know much about how any funders, be they philanthropists or foundations, go through that process, or if they do. So my big ask, whether it's in this session or beyond, if people are interested in this, please do get in touch, because in fact I'm currently hiring someone whose first major role will be to focus entirely on this question, is what the hell might people use data for around the cost of living crisis? And we have lots of hunches that this data can be of value. We know it can be of value, but we are very, very far from having good answers about how best it can be used. And really that user research is the thing that we really need to focus on now. So I think that's probably enough from me. We're delighted to have, I should say that, I'm getting to speak today in place of Joe Kerr, but also in place, I guess, of the other organizations who are partners in this partnership and contribute data. So we've helped to kind of spark that into life and to oversee it. But I'm very clear on the fact that it's charities' eyes and ears in communities and through their services and through their practitioners that it is that's the real power. And I'm only able to speak because of the existence of that. So yeah, enough from me.
Thank you so much, Tris. That was really informative. And thank you, Morgan, as well, for just both of you providing so much information and all of the great work that you're doing